Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassa. Well, if you're in Southeast Asia or Perth, I guess, it's your evening, correct? And that would be our final evening of this retreat. For me, it's the morning. And so thoughts obviously go to how do you develop a spiritual life in the ordinary doings of life? How do you do practice at home? And so a couple of questions that were related to that. Ajahn, could you kindly elaborate unburdened with duties in the chant for a layperson who has to take care of elderly parents? And then the other one was, how can we as lay folk design our home environment to be conducive for Dhamma cultivation? Unburdened with duties. I asked someone who knows Pali, I don't know Pali, does that mean having duties but not being burdened by them? Or does that mean having no duties? And unfortunately, the translation was having no duties, which then meant I would have to leave my position as abbot of the monastery and go somewhere else. Well, I haven't found that to be true or necessary, because I've found the life of responsibility is not, in fact, if it's used well, it's necessary to grow, right? To grow as a human being. So where do duties become burdensome for me, and I guess for all of us really, is when I can't sustain awareness of suffering, and I just get caught up with the suffering, because inevitably in any life, normal life, someone's going to press your buttons. Some situation is going to press your anger button, press your fear button, press your whatever button, huh? And the latent tendency towards dukkha will arise. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing if you can be aware of it, because that is the pathway to understand yourself. And I think, I mean, I've seen situations where people will shy away from responsibility, but I feel they're not that strong. They're not that mature. They haven't taken on the mature responsibilities of an adult. Vice versa, I've also seen people take on so much responsibility, they just get totally burned out. Or they get so identified with their responsibilities. I am this responsible person in whatever way. So there's no magic formula. In terms of caring for someone, the opportunity there is the 4 Brahma Viharas. So caring for elderly patients, elderly parents, it really depends on where they're at, how good you can do that. Because if the folk you're taking care of have dementia issues, that's very, very hard. It's very, very hard to do. So you need lots of help. If, however, it was like with my mom, I took care of her. She was a really neat person to be with, and we had a good friendship. And so it wasn't emotionally taxing in that way that dementia can be very, very confusing. It was actually a very lovely chance to just constantly develop the Brahma Viharas in a way which wasn't meditated. It wasn't like a meditation. It was just a natural response, either compassion or joy, or learning how to be at peace with her pain. That was a good lesson. And then the physical part, well, yeah, you get exhausted and you kind of hang in there, and if you want to do something else, and that's natural. But the hard part was, for me, very, very profound. So that's the opportunity of caring for your elders. And then the other question, how do you develop a home environment of practice? To me, it seems one of the most important things is Kalyana Mitta. That you need, spiritual friendships are so important. Whether you're kind of getting burnt out, you need to talk to someone, or you're just not quite sure what your practice is doing, or you're becoming arrogant about your practice. And then your Kalyana Mitta says, well, wait a minute. No, you're not the Buddha yet. Come on, settle down. or whatever it might be. Kalyana Mitta are the so important that you have Dharma friends who are in the same wavelength as you in terms of practice, and who you can first of all just enunciate your problems to, like the capacity to, like if I have some conflict in my mind about caring for my parents or whatever, and I can actually just say it out to someone. Just in the saying out, I become more mindful, don't I? So that if you are the recipient in a Kalyana Mitta relationship of someone's sorrow or difficulty, and you listen to them, then they become more mindful, because you are a listener from the perspective of Dharma rather than necessarily trying to fix their problem or dismiss their problem. So good listening, and friends that are good listeners, to me is a great part of the definition of Kalyana Mitta. Obviously, the values of Sila, the values of Buddha, Dhamma, all of those are inherent in a Kalyana Mitta relationship. And if you have that, then that's tremendously helpful. As a monk, I have a lot of that. I have a lot of very interesting men who are my peers and then my juniors. And it's so refreshing just to present an idea and someone has a different perspective and they say, yeah, but have you thought of that? No, I didn't think of that. Or if I'm just stressed out, I need to vent towards someone. I said, I can't take this anymore. Can you? That's actually, you need someone to vent to sometimes too, don't you? Because we're human and we have emotions and we get exhausted. So taking care of elderly parents, then, if it's taken on as an owner's duty, there's nothing wrong with the word duty, I think. Depends how you define it. If duty is something that is honorable rather than onerous, it's something that is, that is like, as a monk, I have the duty to live by the Vinaya, and that's an honor rather than a burden, something heavy. So how does one make the vocation of care, let's say, how does it become heavy as a mental state? It becomes heavy as a physical state because it's exhausting. Okay, there's just a lot of time spent in caring for the person and a lot of self-surrender to that, and plus all the other things one might be juggling in one's life. So fair enough. But what is the mind state where it loses its loving quality and becomes, oh, it's my duty, I have to do this? That's what we have to investigate. The potential is the Brahma Viharas. Now, within that potential, that doesn't mean that we like it all the time. And we have to be honest that when we don't like it, we're honest to say, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's what it feels like, not to want to do this anymore, but you do it. And that's important, because then you're not repressing the natural negativity you might feel in the doing of this. You're not saying that you like it all the time, but you're seeing it as a practice. So that's the essence of any dharmic life, is that it is a practice of Four Noble Truths within the social constraints and responsibilities that are given us by circumstance. And then within that, if your practice has developed this sense of it's like this and it all belongs, the heart mind, knowing the way things are and they will change, if all of that way of attending to life has been cultivated and understood, I would say, then when the natural negativity of exhaustion comes up, you can deal with it, but you can see it's still an object, because your underlying sense of what you want to do is you want to care You want to do your duty in a good way, not just in an onerous way. So if the culture says, you must take care of your parents and you'll be a bad person if you don't take care of your parents, and it becomes a kind of fearful cultural obligation which doesn't have joy in it, then you want to investigate that underlying attitude. Why can't this be actually a wholesome activity? Because obviously it is wholesome. So for me, caring for my mom was one of the most, like I tell people, the two best things I've done in my life is become a monk and take care of my mother. But having said that, then I meet other people who have dysfunctional relationships with their parents. And maybe even the parents were abusive. Then I say, well, that's different. You can't judge my experience by your predicament. So then if someone has had, let's say people come to me and they say, how can I take care of my parents when I had this abusive, dysfunctional relationship with them? My dad was an alcoholic, or, whatever went on. Then it's a whole different ball game, because then you have a different psychological construct, which is much more complicated. And then I would say you really have limits. You have to be careful about what you can do, what is possible. And in terms of possibility, I would say, can you sustain mindfulness around the negativities, around the ego states? And can it be a way where you develop the Brahma Viharas and wisdom around this? So there's no one pattern to this. And the danger of burnout is very real. And then it gets even worse, and you can't take care of anyone. You're just so scattered and so scarred by the situation. And that's, I think, Kalyanamitta would come into that. To go beyond one's limits is fine. That's fine. But can you go beyond your perceived limits with mindfulness and say, oh, exhaustion. So for me, I never got fed up of taking care of my mother, but I was certainly exhausted. But that's okay, because, well, exhaustion feels this way, it's fine. But I had a lot of friends. I had and I continue to have this monastery is actually because of mom. My mom, my mom lived to be 97. And she wanted to get out long before 97. She had enough. So she, the common thing, which elderly people somewhat this, she said, he's forgotten me. God has forgotten me. I'm stuck here. And then we would see, we'd see in the paper that someone has lived to be 115, and both of us would groan, oh no. But then in the last year of her life, she said, oh, maybe I lived because we started this monastery in the middle of my care of her. So I'd been with mom like 4 years. And then in the 5th year, we started this monastery, and I was commuting back and forth. But in the last year of life, she said, oh, maybe that's why I lived so long, to start the monastery. And that was just, that was such a lovely perception on her part. So looking back at this experience, it's really was very profoundly heart opening. But again, the factors there were really constructive. Like I tell everyone this, me and my mom got on really, really well. And we had one disagreement in 9 years, which lasted 20 minutes. Now that's not bad. So you can see it wasn't any kind of a stress on that level of relationship. It was beautiful. It was very fulfilling. Now, if mom had Alzheimer's and she lost her personality, I don't know what I would have done. I would have constructed something different. I should think, right? So each person has to take it for themselves, and then, like, to put an elderly person in a home who has Alzheimer's, that's a very painful thing to do. But I wouldn't condemn it, because that might be the only way that the caregiver could survive, and it could survive that tension and so on. And then it depends on your support network. So like I was saying, that I had a whole Buddhist community supporting me, and I was teaching. I was still a monk, and I had this. I had a lot of very, very good things in place there. If you're all alone doing this, then it's very, very different. But the one thing I can say is, what is the attitude towards the duty, whether it's the duty of work or the duty of caring for children or elderly? What is the underlying attitude? Is it one of like, I'm going to take this challenge of family life or monastic life or vocation as a way as a vehicle to understand myself? Or is it like, oh, I have to go to work, but I really want to meditate. And, oh, I have to go to work now, but I want to meditate. That won't be very, very constructive. If you're going to go to work, that's your practice. If you take care of your parents, that's your practice. If you're a monk, that's your practice. So attitude. And so what I've been hoping to cultivate on a retreat like this is this very simple attitude. Again, going back to my teacher, Luangpor Viradhammo, it's like this. And it all belongs. And this is very profound. It's very, very profound. And then within that openness and spaciousness, there's a chance to respond from a very, very good place. And from that openness and spaciousness, it's also very possible to be with the negativity and not feel guilty about it. So maybe wanting your parents to make a quicker exit, you might feel guilty about that. But that's natural. Everyone's tired. They're tired. You're tired. So that's not like you're hoping they die. It's just the natural response. Oh, enough already. Enough of this already. And then you feel that, and it changes, because that's not your identity. That's not who you are. In terms of home life and developing a practice, I was thinking what would be the most essential elements. Well, obviously, sila. And the kind of basics of a good life and a life of generosity. But beyond that, I think space is what's missing in most lives, urban life. And by space, I don't mean like a big room. I mean bandwidth space in your mind, because the way our society works is very distracted. And of course, we can see that when you go to an airport, everyone's on the iPhone, if anyone will ever go to the airport again, or wherever you go. And so the mind tends to be very much preoccupied with experience, okay? So my suggestion is, how do you create space? And that means you put away the distractions and you just sit in a chair and just be. And you realize how difficult that is. That's not easy, because just sit in a chair. I mean, there's things to do. I've got emails to answer, and I'm doing a book, and then I've got to do this, and then I've got to, and then so the kind of mind is always in a flutter and busy, and then just stopping and saying, oh, well, the room's like this, outside's like that. That's where the mind rests. That's where the mind has a chance to porn, the holiday of the heart. And that's a very simple thing, but it seems to be the most difficult thing for people. And I talk to folk who are developing a practice at home. The most difficult thing seems to be just to get on the cushion, just to stop and just sit down for half an hour. So that's the idea of space in the mind, to then, first of all, process the material that has built up in your consciousness from the interactions you have with family and work. So that sense of purification, and that we sometimes jokingly call maintenance work. You have to do your maintenance work. You have to oil the car and do all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, your joints get all stiff and creaky. And you could see that if you have a practice where you just sit and you observe the tensions and stresses that arose, like if you have I would say morning practice is very, very helpful, because in the mornings, if you can adjust your sleeping patterns to go to sleep early, if you're an owl type rather than a rooster type, then you have difficulty if you like to go through the night, but then you can maybe practice later. But in general, if you could get up earlier and go to sleep early. So just know that, oh, this person's very boring. They go to sleep at 9 o'clock. Okay, you get the reputation of being very, very boring. But then you get up early and before everyone else, and then you do an hour's meditation. This is very healthy, very, very healthy. And then in that space, you do have a lot of space. You know, you don't have to answer the phone or relate with family members or whatever. And in that space, you'll face the material that built up yesterday. You know, the tensions or whatever will somehow come up. It's just the way the thing works. And then as you witness them, you'll relieve that tension, relieve that. So that's important. So we call that maintenance work. But then also you, assuming that's not too stressful, you do develop more sense of composure and collectedness in a slow training over the years, because you have a pattern where you return to composure. You've developed that pattern in your life, and it's the same pattern you'd have in sport. If you were developing, what do they play in Malaysia? You play with badminton, right? Yeah, I said right. I'm not sure. So anyway, like I've never played badminton, and I don't think I will. But if I were to play badminton, then if I played every morning, then I'm pretty old. I'd probably still be terrible, but I would be better. I'd be better. And so obviously this is just the way training works. So if each morning you do it, and you just, like Luangpor Cha's phrase, if you want to meditate, meditate. If you don't want to meditate, meditate. Is very important, because how often do you want to meditate? Most of the times you'd rather just stay in bed. So until you get into it, then you really like to meditate. So then you just do it. You know, like you just take the racket and hit the little, what do you call those things? Birdies or anyway. I don't know my terminology for badminton. Someone will have to tell me. But you just do it, don't you? You just do it. And then lo and behold, you are better. You are better. And you don't know how it worked. And that's the idea of training. So if you have a morning practice and you get a good night's sleep, and then you honor that, you really make that important, then it'll be a really nice space for you. You'll really, yeah, that's a good space. So then your training will begin to give you more sense of what does the composed and collected mind feel like. You'll know that. That will, of course, enter into the day. So your first encounter with your family will be more mindful. So even if your first encounter with your family is kind of quasi-negative from something yesterday, you'll be more aware of that. And you'll have more chance not to buy into wrong speech or just grumpiness or whatever it might be, whatever's being triggered, because you're more aware, because you made yourself more aware. And you can see the consequence of that is when you have your first work meeting or whatever, each increment has a better chance of being more mindful. Not just more mindful, but also more understanding, because a lot of the learning we have as human beings is in our human interactions, isn't it? So then not only are you more mindful that maybe you're kind of negative towards this person, but you see the negativity, you don't attach to it, you don't buy into it, and it tends to cease, and you have no residue. You have no residue left to it. Whereas before, maybe when you're heedless, you feel grumpy, you say, "You turkey, leave me alone." And then, I don't know what language you use for these things, but "You badminton racket." And you say it, and then of course you have all the regret, remorse, you have residue. And then the residue creates a sense of ego. Oh, I'm a terrible person. Yeah, but they're rotten too. Oh, yes, but blah, blah, blah. And that whole sense of ego and self gets reborn. You don't want that. So how can you engage in life, still have the negative defilements come up, not buy into them, and then had no residues, and the tendency towards the defilements falls away. So that's daily life practice. It's challenging, it's challenging that way. So I would say morning practice is so helpful. And the mornings, like I guess in Thailand, usually that you don't have much variation in sunrise, the time of sunrise. Here we get a variation of 4 hours, I think, in a year. But anyway, in Thailand, like 4 o'clock, 4:30, it's dark. It's pretty quiet. Even in Bangkok, I think. And you know, you enter into that kind of quietness, the quietness of the whole environment, and that's very, very helpful. That's very, very helpful. So I would say if you can do that, and let people just know that's what you do. You know, are you available for a party at 12 o'clock tonight? No, not really. I'm not a party animal. I'm a meditation animal. I do this. So getting a reputation for being boring is actually probably really handy, really helpful. So Kalyanamitta and space and a good morning practice. Then retreats. Retreats are very, very, very useful. You really kind of up your game, don't you? And that gives you incentive and insight and more motivation to do more practice. And then a good teacher, like to have someone who is a Kalyanamitta but has maybe more experience than you. That's very, very helpful, because getting to know a teacher that you can regularly contact means they know your story, right? You've kind of gone through your story the first time, explained who you are, teachers listened, okay, and then after a while, okay, I kind of get where you're at. And then from then on, you have a really good rapport, because you don't have to explain yourself each time teacher knows. So that's very, very helpful. And sometimes because of internet and so on, we can't have personal contact with teachers. So that's just the way it is. In terms of study, like I don't present this teaching in any kind of formal academic way, because I'm just sort of a spontaneous kind of guy. So I certainly studied it on my own. I never had any, like in the forest tradition, the Farang monk, the Western monks are a bit odd, because the Thai monks do have some formal education necessary for them to be monks. Whereas the Farangs, we've kind of slipped through, the Westerners, we've kind of slipped through. And we don't have that formal structure because in Thailand, and that also means that here we've never developed most of us formal education, but most of us are so motivated and probably come from university backgrounds that we do a lot of self-study. And our teachers said, read this, read that, look at this, look at that. And my encounter with Buddhism came about through an American monk when I was in India, and he was really he had a really good intellect, and he was deeply read on philosophy, and especially existential philosophy and things like that. So he encouraged me to get to know certain suttas and get to know certain structures. He encouraged me not to go to commentaries, to stay with the suttas. And get the basics down. So I spent, quite a few years just trying to figure out why anicca dukkha anatta. Why is that important? Why is dependent originate? So I wasn't just learning like these lists, but why would the Buddha want to talk about that? Why is that important? And why is dependent origination fit with that? And where did the paramitas come into that? And where does Nirodha come into so and working through all the different complex patterning that you have in Theravada Buddhism, I began to see it as one piece. I said, yeah, okay, I get it. This is, it all fits. It makes sense. It's one piece. And that was that was intellectually rigorous, which I enjoyed, but I was terribly confused sometimes. And then I'd go back and I'd puzzle until it began to gel into, okay, this is one structure. So that when I received teaching from Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Sumedho, I had that structure in place, and then they enlivened it for me. They made it real as my experience. So maybe like Luangpor Viradhammo would say, dependent origination is something happening right now in the moment in your heart. And I'd say, oh yeah, I get it. I see what you're talking about. or Luangpor Cha would emphasize something, or Luangpor Sumedho would emphasize something. So having all that as a piece, then I would ask you, what is your intellectual understanding of Theravada Buddhism? Do you get it in that sense? Can I say to you, do you understand how dependent origination relates to anicca dukkha anatta? Can you see that? If I say to you, there is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unborn, the deathless, nibbana, peace, the harbor, liberation. Can you understand that in relationship to paticca samuppada? I'm not asking you to write me a letter, but I'm just saying that there is an intellectual component to this, which is very, very helpful for the intellectual doubting mind. But the intellect is not the final thing. It's that the intellect is used to understand the liberation of the heart. So if you haven't really pondered these teachings, if they've just been hit and miss, and it's not a whole, then I would suggest you do some basic study on Four Noble Truths, and then take each of those and try to just, what does it mean in my mind? And again, I'm not a scholar. I don't have an academic background in that sense, so I'm not very good at that. Other monks are, so you could find it somewhere. But in terms of some of the questions here, maybe I could go to that sense of understanding. So this is a question. Dear Luangpor, consciousness itself is a conditional phenomenon that would arise and vanish due to causes and conditions, subject to change, impermanent in nature. In this case, how would its characteristics be seen as unconditioned, although it may appear to be quiet, balanced, neutral? Did you mean to see it as unconditioned by defilement, but as far as the impermanence and non-self aspects are concerned, it is still impermanent, not self? No, that's not what I said. So what you want to, all I can say is, where do I come from in the way I talk about this? Well, my aspiration comes from less from the sense of defilement and letting go of defilement, because I certainly want to be a happy guy, and defilement is not a happy state of mind. So certainly there's that. But my sense of it comes more from the Buddha's, what I think his aspiration was about. So if you go back to the original story, the kind of what we have of the original story, why the Buddha takes on the life of a samana, and he sees an old person, right? The Devadutta, the heavenly messenger, and he realizes, I too am subject to aging. He sees a sick person, I too am subject to sickness, and he sees a corpse, I too am subject to death. So those three things throw him into a spin. Like, what is there any way out of this? It's inevitable that my body, and I'm going to have to go through that. Is there any way out of this? And then he sees a sadhu meditating, and he asks Channa, who's that character there sitting under the tree, or something like that? And Channa says, well, actually, that's a samana, and he is searching for the deathless, for the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unformed, nibbana, peace, and so on. So for me, that was the aspiration the Buddha had in his renunciation. So he goes forth, seeks teachers, realizes enlightenment, and he says there is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unborn, the deathless, nibbana, peace, the harbor, liberation. And if there were not that, there would be no death. Then to that consciousness, the way I investigate that, it's something you have to investigate rather than believe in. So when you have a statement like that, That's a conclusion. Conditional phenomena and so on. That's a conclusion. That's a sankhara. That's a constructed thing, a conclusion. The unconditioned cannot be a conclusion, because a conclusion is something that is constructed. So we have the word sankhara. So sankhara is something that's constructed, built up. So any thought, any conclusion, intellectual conclusion, is a constructed thing. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, is not born again into this world. So then I can observe change. And what happens if I observe change and I make no conclusions? I make no positions, and I just wait and watch. That's where the question, I think, can be answered. Right? Now, waiting and watching is very, very difficult because of defilement. Greed, hatred, and delusion distract attention away from the purity of attention, and the mind gets all caught up in ego and all the rest of it. So rather than like saying that's true or untrue, I would say, is presence ever absent? I would make it more an inquiry. Otherwise, how does this person answer the Buddha statement that there is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the form? Now, the problem with language is as soon as you say there is this, it sounds like a thing. And so language gets very, very impossible in that. But to me, that reference is so very, very important for me, that this realization, or if I go to Luangpor Liam's Enlightenment piece, if you've read that in No Worries, and what he's talking about does not change. And he says it, you know, he had this in 1969, he came to his enlightenment, and this piece was written maybe 15 years ago and hasn't changed since. So he's realized something unchanging. And what is that? What do you call that? Well, if I look at this experience now, then I can observe change, or I can observe, is there something unchanging? As soon as they say something, it sounds like an object. So is there, what doesn't change, I might say? And then I have to be very, very quiet. And then I would say that's the suggestion, which is hard to sustain. And that's, to me, what, to some extent, Sama Samadhi, Sama Virya, Sama Sati is inclining us towards to do that, The Luangpor Sumedhos, it's like this. Thai tradition, first tradition, Penyang Niang, all these different things are pointing to something that's difficult to do. It's difficult to stop, proliferating thinking, difficult to sustain presence, difficult to inquire into that. So it's not an easy thing. And so we tend to work with what's more easy, is like, yeah, let go of defilement, deal with the fear, deal with the anger. And as you deal with that, and you let go of the defilements, then the capacity to be present becomes more profound. And then these kind of questions become really quite interesting. So let's say, in instructions, you say stillness of knowing and say be that knowing. This implies a self exists. But can you elaborate on this? I.e., sounds like self is needed to know the stillness and experiential seems true as well. Or what is the difference between Sakaya Ditti and Mana? So the way I think it evolves is, first and foremost, you have ego view, like really gross ego view. But then you still have the sense of being the doer, or being the watcher, or being the witness. There's still a sense of, and that's what we call, I would think, asmimana, or mana, or a more subtle conceit of self. And then if you wait and see that as an object, then there's the experience of sunyata. The sense of self falls away, and there is knowing, but there is no knower. And that takes patience. But when I say those things, language is very, very difficult here. So I say be the knowing, that implies the self. Yeah. This is just for language is it gets very, very difficult there. And I guess that's why I've been emphasizing in this retreat, just trust in knowing, see what happens. Don't make a conclusion. Don't get caught in conclusions, because conclusions are still sankharas. They're still sankata, and this is asankata, unconditioned, uncreated, unborn, undying. And what is that pointing to? What is that pointing? And that should, to me, be the primary inquiry of any kind of transcendent teaching. The secondary inquiry is how do I deal with this fear? So to me, that was the primary inquiry 40 years ago. How do I deal with this fear? And how am I going to get beyond social anxiety? Because that was foremost in my mind. But as the defilements fall away, that is not necessary, and these more subtle kind of inquiries become more than interesting, very compelling, I'd say. Yeah. Thank you and gratitude for the teachings in this retreat. We appreciate your. We enjoyed the talk on culture. The reading from the book today about the state of watchful and available reminded me of Ajahn Sumedho's expression of the attitude, relaxed attention. But these two expressions point to the same direction, for sure. Yeah. And this person also says, I am from Budapest, Budapest, and then she puts BUDDHA/PEST with a smiley. And then I love playing with words with a winky smiley. Anyway, if you're from Hungary, you'll get that. So like once you understand the project of letting go, of non-attachment, then you see that teachers are using all kinds of language, but pointing to one thing, I would say. And you hear like when Jean Klein offers me watchful and available, I say, oh, that's cool. I'll keep that one. I like that. Because it's the same as relaxed attention or receptive attention, or you begin to see, they're all, we're using language to awaken us to something which is common, which is one thing. And the more you understand this attitude, I would say, the more you pick up on the language, which is pointing to that in poetry and literature, in spiritual things. I first experienced impermanence when I was aware a pleasant sensation that the heart would change. Later, a few friends with good health died due to various reasons, which is also impermanence in life. I found I changed with less desire, experiencing the impermanence. In the same time, the experience of impermanence made me feel insecure, fear, depressed, and demotivated in life too. Did I do something wrong in practice? How do I have a balance of experiencing impermanence at the same time leading a motivated and peaceful life without feeling fear and insecure? Well, sorry about that. But if we're conscious of fear and insecurity now, would that not be better than being conscious of it just before you're dying? Seems to me it's a good thing. And like if you're waiting for the last 3 months of your life, and all of a sudden you're afraid of death, you don't have much time to practice. You gotta squeeze in 3 months there, but you've lived a whole life. Whereas if it comes up when you're younger, maybe there's some goodness to it. But I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to make good seemingly bad. So then I would say that fear and insecurity is because of attachment to body, is because of identity with family, is because of all those things. And now it becomes conscious. Now, if you can see fear as impermanent, as something that's changing, then you're mindful. and you're inclining to the unconditioned, to the deathless. But if you take fear and insecurity with the narratives of ego, then you become a fearful person. So once something manifests, you're there, right? You can't go back now. You can't, it's Pandora's box open, whatever you want to say. It's up in the air now. So what to do about it? Is it a bad thing? If you say it's a bad thing, then you'll try to repress it or deny it or distract it. Not going to work. But if you say, okay, this is the karma now, I can look at it now. I can be with it now. And then if I'm with it now, then first of all, it doesn't have so much power over me because I know it as an object rather than be the subject. And then it dissipates. And then when death comes, then there's much more opportunity to contemplate, well, what is the unconditioned? Is it awareness? Huh? Or if I don't, then the fear just takes over. And then however consciousness carries on, then the fear becomes a major factor in that. So try to see this as a challenge rather than as a bad thing. See it as a challenge. See if you can witness the feelings of insecurity and fear in the body. What is it as a bodily kind of thing? And then make your motivation compassion. How can I serve my family? How can I serve my culture? How can I be a better person? So there is motivation from compassion rather than from personal whatever. But the best way I found to deal with fear is to know it as a bodily sensation, not take it to thought. Thank you, Luangpor, for your teachings. Regarding the sound meditation, I get confused when I hear multiple sounds at the same time. During meditation, should we be aware of all sounds happening at one time or just one sound that seems more obvious at any one time? I find it difficult to observe all the sounds at one time, and my awareness will shift from one sound to the next by itself. Is this correct? That's concentration. That's not what I'm suggesting. If I want to, like, again, there was a strange bird call this morning. I didn't know what it was. Then I'm concentrating on the sound, and I'm looking in the forest to see where is it. That's concentration. Then I'm excluding other sounds, and I'm focusing on that one. That's concentration. But what I'm asking you to do is to emphasize the awareness rather than the sound. So when you're getting confused by this sound, that means your mind is following the sounds. It's this sound, it's that sound. So your mind is out. So if we take that to Luangpor Dun's enunciation of the Four Noble Truths, switched around in a different numbering system, the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the path, knowing the mind, is the end of suffering. The mind going outside is the cause. So your attention is going out and the sounds are changing. What should I do? What should I do? Rather than your attention being receptive, allowing whatever sound to be there. Just let it come in. So it's receptive awareness, available awareness, rather than focused, discriminatory, questioning, looking at out. The mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going inside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind, you know that you know. You know, this is the way it is now. You know that you know. It's like this. Is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. And you can see that in, like, you can have a negative emotion and be out in it. So the negative emotion is maybe you're annoyed at someone for doing something, and then your attention is preoccupied with the annoyance. That's the mind going out. And then you notice, oh, annoyance feels this way. That's the mind knowing the mind. That's the end of suffering. It's not the end of annoyance. Annoyance still kind of comes and goes, but the end of suffering is you're not attached to it. The annoyance itself is just sankhara, which is unpleasant. Now, if you think that the end of suffering is having no annoyance, yes, you could see how the tendencies to annoyance would eventually lessen. But in the moment, that structure, that formula is very, very helpful. So you can, and we can all see that. We have some negative thing, we pick it up with thought. That's the mind going outside, is the cause. And then we notice, whoa, annoyance feels this way. The mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. A very good pattern to pick up. So this person is, I suggest like just let the sounds come to you. Do that with sight. Like we have a standing Buddha rupa here from Burma, and I look at it and then I just let it come to me. I can look at it and say, well, what's that in its hand? And how tall is it? It's 4 or 5, maybe 5 foot tall, and it's black. I can discriminate. Yeah, I can look that way. But also I can just allow visual perception just to come to me, as it were. And that's very stilling. Sound, same way. Then if you get that pattern, you can apply that to emotion. Just let the emotion come to you. And that's a weird way of talking, maybe. Then maybe we say, like, just let it be the way it is. Annoyance is this way. And then that's where you have to trust and awareness. And then, so someone said they really enjoyed this retreat. Thank you for your compliments. I wonder that it'd be possible to run similar retreats monthly or bi-monthly. No. You burned me out. But having said that, thank you for your compliments. I mean, it's nice to hear. But I think Joyce and JC are organizing a retreat from KL in next month, correct? Joyce and JC, you're somewhere out there. Joyce, is that right? Do we have they won't unmute Joyce, okay. But I think it's correct that we have at the end of August, correct, right? And that would be on our website. I guess we'll post that.
Yes,
there she is.
Luangpor.
And what's the date for that?
28 onwards to the 31st of August.
Okay, so we'll post that. And then August, September, there's a retreat from the Ottawa Buddhist Society. We won't post that because that will be our first in-person retreat. So we're renting a retreat center that we use, which is on the Ottawa River near the city of Ottawa. And we'll have 20 people, including 2 monastics in person, social distancing. I don't know if that's necessary, and then we'll have live stream of that one too. That'll be in September. So I guess that'll be on the Ottawa Buddhist Society website. That's September. October, November, the Nyompung has organized a retreat where I'm supposed to be in Thailand, but that's not looking so good, is it? Mainea. So there's a few things going on. But there's, Ajahn Suchito's teaching retreats, and there's a lot of very, very good Dhamma, Ajahn Kalyano, and so on. But thanks for your invitations. And then 9:25, okay. Did that one, hold on. So, Ajahn, can you discuss a little about your thoughts on the Goenka method and the Mahasi labeling method? So, I've not, any methodology which isn't used for a long, long time, it's hard to assess experientially. So I have a limited amount of experience of Goenka G's retreat method. I did 2 retreats. It was interesting. We had come from Thailand, and I was in my fourth year as a monk, maybe 4th, 5th. And we didn't know what a retreat was. We just always meditated. Like, what do you mean retreat? Life is just meditation. So then what was his name? One of the Goenkaji's older teachers, John Coleman. He invited us, and he had a great love of Luangpor Cha, and he invited us to just sit in on a retreat, just to see the form. So I did two Goenka retreats back to back. So then that's where we learned about like a format for retreats. I didn't pursue that method. For me, I felt it was, to me, there was no mention of transcendence. And I wasn't interested in objects, sensations. I was interested in transcendence. So it didn't really appeal to me. Now, whether or not that technique takes you there, I don't know, because I never really was interested in it. So I can't say, but that was my particular interest, was not in sensations and objects. And I couldn't see how paying attention to objects could take you to the objectless. I couldn't quite figure that out, but maybe it comes about in some way in more esoteric teachings that they give, I'm not sure. And then the Mahasi labeling method, I kind of started with that as a samanera at Wat Mahathat in Kanaha. And I had come to Thailand, I didn't know anyone, and I wanted to ordain, I didn't know anything, and I was taken to Wat Mahathat and ordained as a samanera, and then just told to do the slow walking and labeling. And I had no real instruction or much help, and I could have gone crazy. Because I think you do need a little bit of help when you start. So it wasn't appealing to me because it wasn't a lifestyle. And obviously it's not meant to be a lifestyle. And I was looking for instruction and help and so on. So I was kind of doing this, but I wasn't inspired by it. And then my teacher at Wat Mahathat, he took me to Royet, and then he took me to Luangpor Cha's monastery, and I fell in love with Luangpor Cha, and eventually I went there and became a monk. And then what I found was like I needed a whole lifestyle. And then Luangpor Cha's emphasis was, like with slow walking, he said, well, just walk ordinary because life is ordinary. So I found that more helpful for me because my mind tended to want to control. And I wasn't interested in controlling. I was interested more in liberation. So, but I could see the point of the labeling. That was very effective. Like awakening to the aramana, rather than just being caught in the narratives about the mood of the mind. So I could see the point of that. But again, I never pursued it very, very deeply. So my commentaries are very shallow. And I think that's always good to remember, like if you think about Tibetan Buddhism, where they'll do maybe 100,000 prostrations or some vast number, and within that prostration they'll do a visualization and a mantra. I could never do that. I mean, how do they do that? They must be Superman. And so I can't possibly know what the effect on that monk or nun, if they practice that, what that technique does for them. I can't, because I haven't done that. So in the same way, my experiences are personal in this way. They're very shallow in that sense. So you have to ask someone who is adept and who has really, really good results from those techniques that are useful. Okay, that's that. I think I have covered it. So I guess we could close this one, huh? I guess we're finished. I think I've talked enough.